He was just a quiet single dad sitting in row 8, his calloused fingers laced together in his lap, his gaze fixed on the clouds outside, the small oval window, while the woman beside him, a sharply dressed journalist named Elena, tried in vain to draw him into conversation. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small moments to change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories. Also, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from. He offered only polite one-word answers, his attention perpetually drifting to the sleeping form of his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, whose head rested against his shoulder, a small stuffed rabbit clutched in her hand. This flight from Chicago to Seattle was just another leg in their routine life. A life he had carefully constructed to be safe, predictable, and utterly devoid of the chaos that had defined his past. No one noticed him, this unremarkable man with weary eyes and a quiet demeanor, and that was exactly how he wanted it. No one knew that the steady hand resting on his daughter, his arm had once controlled the stick of an F-A-18 Super Hornet, that his mind had processed combat data faster than most computers, or that his call sign, a name that still commanded respect in certain circles, was a secret he guarded as fiercely as his daughter's bedtime stories. The cabin was a gentle hum of ordinary life, the soft murmur of conversations, the clink of drink carts, the occasional cry of a baby. Then at 30,000 feet the ordinary shattered, a violent shudder ripped through the airframe, a bone-jarring lurch that sent unsecured bags tumbling from overhead bins. The deep, reassuring thrum of the twin engines sputtered, choked, and then died into a silence so profound it was deafening. The plane didn't just shake. It seemed to drop, a sickening, gut-wrenching fall that left stomachs behind and turned calm into chaos. Oxygen masks dropped from the panels with a series of sharp pops, dangling and swaying like grotesque party favors as the cabin filled with the primal sounds of pure terror. Screams tore through the air. People clutched each other, and a flight attendant, her face pale but her training forcing her into motion, stumbled down the aisle. It was in that precise moment that the quiet man in row 8 transformed. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. His hand moved with an automatic fluid grace, gently but firmly guiding the mask over his daughter's face, his eyes locking onto hers. "It's okay, Lily girl," he said, his voice a bedrock of calm in the storm. "Daddy's here. Just breathe." He secured his own mask, his gaze never leaving her terrified face, his thumb stroking her cheek. His entire world had shrunk to the space of her fear. He wasn't Mark the single dad anymore. The core of a pilot, forged in fire and discipline, was surfacing. Up in the cockpit, the situation was dire. The captain, a veteran pilot named Sarah, and her first officer were running checklists with frantic haste. But the silence of the engines was absolute. Sarah's voice, when she keyed the mic to declare a mayday, was tight with a fear she couldn't show. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Tower, this is Midwest Air 2272, dual-engine flameout. We are descending through 28,000 feet. Request immediate vectors for emergency landing." The response from Seattle Center was immediate, but offered no solution, only a grim reality. "Tuntu, we have you. Nearest suitable airport is Boeing Field, but you're not going to make it at your current rate of descent. We're scrambling search and rescue." The situation was hopeless. Then a new steely voice cut through the frequency. "Midwest 2272. This is Vanguard 11, U.S. Navy. We have you visual. We are joining on your wing. Maintain present heading." Outside the windows of the terrified passengers, 2 sleek gray fighter jets appeared, one on each side of the airliner. Their presence both menacing and impossibly reassuring. They flew with an eerie precision, their pilots scanning the dying plane. Inside the cabin, people pressed their faces to the windows, a new wave of murmurs spreading. Mark saw them too, and a flicker of something ancient and familiar passed through his eyes. Quickly masked, Lily clutched his arm tighter. The lead fighter pilot's voice came over the radio again. This time the question laced with a strange, personal urgency. "Midwest 2272, be advised. We have a positive identification on a heat signature in the passenger compartment. Repeat, We have a known military biometric profile in your cabin." The captain and first officer stared at each other, utterly bewildered. "Say again, Vanguard?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. 2272, we need you to relay a query to your passengers. This is a military priority. Ask them, identify your call sign. Sarah's blood ran cold. A call sign? On a civilian airliner? It was insane. But the fighter jets hovering beside them were a stark reminder that they were now part of a situation far larger than a commercial emergency. She took a breath, and her voice came over the cabin speakers, shaky but clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have a unique request. Is there anyone on board with a military aviation background? If so, the fighter jets alongside us are requesting you identify your call sign." The question hung in the oxygen-thin air, bizarre and surreal. Passengers looked at each other, confusion momentarily overriding their fear. In row 8, Mark closed his eyes. He felt Lily's gaze on him, felt Elena's stunned stare. The past he had run from, the identity he had buried, was being publicly summoned from the sky. He knew those jets. He knew the protocol. They weren't asking for a passenger. They were asking for a ghost. He gave Lily's hand one last squeeze and unbuckled his seatbelt. As he stood, Elena gasped. A man across the aisle pointed. A murmur rippled through the cabin. He walked to the nearest flight attendant. His posture now ramrod straight, his chin held high, a man reborn. He gently took the handset from her trembling hand. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't the quiet monotone from before. It was a clear, commanding baritone that cut through the chaos. "Vanguard 1-1, this is Viper." A stunned silence filled the cockpit of the lead fighter jet. "Say again, 2272, the pilot demanded, his own voice thick with disbelief. Mark, the man in row 8, looked out the window at the sleek jet, his old world. "You heard me, Stinger. It's Viper. Now stop gawking and start talking. What do you see that I don't?" The pilot, an old wingman from a decade past, recovered instantly, his voice now sharp with professional respect. "Copy that, Viper. Sir, your APU is out. You've lost all hydraulics. You're a falling brick. But Boeing Field is 20 miles ahead. With your skills, it's possible. We'll give you a visual escort. What do you need?" Mark looked back at his daughter, her small face a mask of hope and terror at Elena, who was watching him as if seeing him for the first time, at the rows of terrified, praying strangers. He didn't need to be a fighter pilot anymore. He needed to be something harder. He needed to be a dad getting his little girl home. He looked forward, visualizing the controls he couldn't feel, the plane that was no longer a machine, but an extension of his own will. "I need you to get on the horn with Boeing. Tower, clear everything, everything. I'm coming in dead stick. No engines, no hydraulics. This is going to be a slide for life." He handed the phone back to the stunned flight attendant and walked back to his seat. Kneeling in the aisle in front of Lily, he cupped her face in his hands. "Lily girl, Daddy has to help fly the plane for a little while. It's going to be very bumpy and very loud, but I need you to be so brave for me, okay? Can you do that? Can you be my brave, brave girl?" Lily, tears streaming down her face, nodded, clutching her rabbit. "I'll be brave, Daddy." He kissed her forehead, then looked at Elena. There was a silent plea in his eyes, a request to watch over his most precious cargo. She nodded, her own eyes glistening. Mark took his seat, but this time he was different. He was connected. The descent was a controlled fall into hell. With no engine power, the massive airliner was a glider, and a terribly inefficient one at that. Mark closed his eyes, not in prayer but in concentration. He became the plane, feeling its descent through the seat of his pants, sensing its energy. He was flying on instinct, on memory, on the raw, untamed skill that had made him a legend. The fighter jets stayed glued to his wings, their pilots calling out altitudes. "Half a mile to the field, Viper, you're low. You're very low." The runway at Boeing Field materialized ahead, a thin grey ribbon surrounded by cityscape. It looked impossibly short. There was no go-round, no second chance. It was this strip of concrete or oblivion. Mark's hands, though not on a real yoke, moved subtly, feeling the imaginary resistance, coaxing the massive plane through the air with pure mental command. "Flaring now," he murmured to himself. The ground rushed up, a terrifying blur. At the last possible second, he pulled back on the imaginary stick, raising the nose. The plane slammed onto the runway with a shriek of tortured metal, a shower of sparks erupting from the belly as it skidded. The landing gear, without hydraulics, had likely collapsed. The noise was apocalyptic, a grinding, tearing roar that filled the universe. They slid, careening slightly, the end of the runway rushing towards them. Then, with a final shuddering jolt, they stopped. A profound, blessed silence descended, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. They were down. They were alive. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a ragged cheer went up, a release of pure, unadulterated relief. People were crying, hugging, laughing. The flight attendants, shaken but professional, began directing the evacuation. But all eyes were on the man in row 8, who was already unbuckling his belt and pulling his daughter into his arms, holding her so tightly it seemed he would never let go. Elena watched, her journalist's mind racing but her heart full. She knew she was witnessing something beyond a story. She was witnessing the soul of a hero who defined heroism, not by the medals on his chest, but by the little girl in his arms. As emergency vehicles converged on the plane, the two fighter jets did a low, triumphant flyover, a final salute to a fallen brother who had risen from his ashes. The man in row 8 was quiet again, whispering to his daughter that it was all over, that they were safe. But everyone on that flight and the pilots in the sky knew the truth. He was never just a quiet single dad. He was Viper, and the sky for one last crucial moment had called his name. If this incredible story of redemption and courage touched your heart, please show your support for the quiet heroes in our midst. Like this video to honor their bravery. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of the strength within us all. And subscribe to Kindness True Stories for more powerful tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Your support helps us share these essential stories of humanity, hope, and heart.